A season takes its shape before our eyes. What have we seen? What does it mean? We've seen plenty already, but not nearly enough. Where you win, when you lose, how you play, who you beat. From the surprising and the expected, to the overwhelming and almighty. Where are we? Behind locked doors, the committee weighs it all. Resumes are evaluated. Decisions are made. Who will be rewarded? Who will be exposed? Who will be in vogue, involved, invited? Who will be in?
On Thanksgiving week, perhaps that 13-person committee is most thankful for, I don't want to say a week off. That's unfair because they have to evaluate everything, but there wasn't a lot of tumultuous behavior this past week. So perhaps, for once, last week can be a guide to the following week. Problems are coming for sure. Glad to have you with us. College Football Playoff Top 25. Reese Davis, Joey Galloway, Booger McFarland. Kirk Herbstreit joins us in just a second. Okay, weren't a lot of upsets. Weren't any upsets right at the top. What do you want to see tonight? What are you looking forward to?
Well, just interesting to see what they do with Wisconsin. You know, we came into last week wondering what to make of Wisconsin. Not many top 25 victories. They take on a Michigan team who I thought had a very good defense. I thought a lot about Michigan. They dominated Michigan. So to me, Wisconsin sent a message to the committee. Not only are we good enough to win the Big Ten, but we're a national player. So maybe, just maybe you move them over Oklahoma a little bit. I don't know if they will, but I think the committee has a newfound respect for Wisconsin after last weekend.
I will fall off my seat if they move Wisconsin. You know, I've been crunching my numbers.
Yeah, exactly. I know you over there with the calculator.
I am interested to see where are teams like NC State, who is now a 4-loss team, that at one point in time was a good win for a team like Clemson. Where's Oklahoma State after losing to Kansas State, who all of a sudden now they've weakened the Big 12. And so these teams we look at that are resume building teams for these teams in the top 4, top 5, as we start to just calculate, okay, where are your good wins? Where are your bad losses? Where are your good losses? Iowa State, another team that was a good loss at one point in time for Oklahoma. Where are these teams going to be ranked? Because honestly, those ones are the ones that are most important tonight because nobody lost, like you mentioned.
There are a lot of bullet points on the resume that would tell you why in the world is USC not being considered in the same breath with Ohio State among 2 lost teams. I'm interested to see if the Trojans creep any closer. Kirk Herbstreit with us, as mentioned. Kirk, what are you looking forward to seeing tonight?
Well, we've talked about the top 7 teams controlling their own destiny with just 2 weeks of college football left. That's exciting within itself. Instead of just focusing on the top 4, you can look all the way down to the top 7. I just want to see where Miami and Clemson are. Clemson sat there at 2 last week. Miami was at 3. Clemson played an FCS team. Miami got pushed around and then came back very strong in the second half and really continues to gain momentum in the last 3 weeks. The only reason, Reese, I think that's important is the potential of what could happen on Championship Saturday with Miami and Clemson playing each other. The loser of that game, the winner's in. The loser of that game, it's a little bit easier to go from 2 and maybe still have an argument to stay in the top 4 as opposed to being at 3 and then maybe going out of the top 4. So I think fighting for that top 2 spot is still pretty significant this week and next week by the committee.
You know, Herbie, one of the things you brought up, the top 7 controlling their own destiny, and I agree with that. Nobody ranked outside of the top 6 in the 4th edition of the rankings, which we are about to see along with you for the first time, has ever made it into the playoff. 4th edition of the rankings. We are ready to unveil them, and as we always tell you, we don't see them ahead of time. We see them when you do. College Football Playoff Rankings brought to you by Capital One, Virginia Tech. So you have Virginia Tech and South Carolina, which is Clemson's opponent this week, making sure that the Tigers will have a couple of opportunities against teams that the committee deems as top 25 teams.
And Virginia Tech is one of those teams we needed to see where they'd be ranked. They are ranked, so they will still count for a team like Clemson. You knock them off, they'll matter on your resume. Also Miami, Kirk, another team that is happy to see Virginia Tech ranked because, again, when it comes down to it, we need to see what good teams did you beat.
Stanford is sitting.
I would just add to that, guys, that Northwestern at 8-3, a chance to win 9 games, get to a bowl game and win 10 games. Sometimes it's a program that gets overlooked, but the Congressman, Pat Fitzgerald, doing an incredible job with the Cats, again, up in the top 25 this year.
And recently, to your point about SC, Stanford being 21, Stanford takes on Notre Dame, you beat Notre Dame, Stanford is going to move up. I think USC is done, but if they have an outside chance, you want Stanford to continue to creep up these rankings.
You know, it's Stanford in an odd situation because this game doesn't mean much other than pride against Notre Dame. But if Washington were to beat Washington State, next week Stanford would play with the Pac-12 title. They can't get in the playoff with 3 losses, you wouldn't think, but well, they're not going to. But with 3 losses, they could still win the Pac-12 championship. Let's continue to look at the rankings. Teams 16 through 20. Mike Norvell's Memphis team, their only loss to UCF, sitting at number 20. Oklahoma State takes a dip down to 19 after falling to Kansas State. You still have Michigan State sitting at 16.
You know, you continue to see teams like an LSU that are going to be on Alabama's resume, Reese, because we'll talk about this. There's a chance that Alabama could lose this weekend, but because of their resume, because of where they are and all these other things, Alabama might be in already, depending on what happens in the Big Ten.
I'm not buying that one.
I'm just saying, there's a scenario out there that could happen.
I agree with you. If I'm any one of these 2-loss teams, I am the biggest Alabama fan in the country. I want Alabama to win out and stay undefeated because of what you just said. You do not want Alabama hanging around with 1 loss.
Yeah, Herbie, what were you saying?
They don't have a resume. If they lose this weekend, the only thing they can hang their hat on is, hey, we're Alabama, we're a great team, we deserve to be in the top 4. Their best wins are LSU and Mississippi State, and that's not going to stand out, in my opinion. That's not a good enough resume.
Well, they're both going to be top 20 wins, I believe, for sure. But the other, I think that their case would be most similar to Ohio State in 2015. Ohio State, I think most people believe that they were one of the 4 best teams. There just wasn't an avenue to put them into the playoffs.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Just to say you're one of the best teams, I buy that, not the resume.
Yeah, we have plenty on that coming up as we continue to count down and look at the what-if scenarios, the hypothetical things. UCF, a huge game coming against USF for a spot in the American Championship game. Scott Frost done a remarkable job, and there's that Mississippi State win, at least for Alabama, if it gets to that. And SC still sitting there at 11, a spot ahead of TCU. Mike Leach's team at 13-2. Leach's team in the Apple Cup, as I mentioned, if they win, they will play USC for the Pac-12 championship. And I'm sure Washington State's resume will quite get there. I think SC's resume is being a bit undervalued.
Well, you know, Rich, you think it's being undervalued. I think the committee has shown us so far they don't value the Pac-12 maybe as much as we do. So when you look at SC and you stack their resume, it looks good, but when you look at the overall value of the conference, I don't know if they value the Pac-12 the way you do.
All right, number 10. Let's look. All right, Penn State's 10. Herbie, go ahead. What do you got?
I was just going to say something about USC, but we could talk about that after we get off our graphics here.
All right, I have a feeling you and I are going to argue about that. All right,
I like that.
Penn State is number 10 at 9-2, and just ahead of the Nittany Lions is Ohio State. That seems to be the team that most people believe among the 2-loss teams, other than Auburn, obviously, that the scenario exists. If the favorites win, that Ohio State would be in great position to make it into the college football playoff. This week, ranked ahead of the Buckeyes at number 8, which, look, they're exactly where they were a week ago. And Notre Dame, I understand, but the resume stacks up pretty favorably with 2-loss teams. The problem is the optic of that 41-8 loss to Miami, which is the same problem Ohio State really has with the Iowa.
Yeah, and when it came and toward the end of the season, and Notre Dame will not get another shot at a really good football team in a week when a Wisconsin and Ohio State play, when the ACC championship game will have Clemson and Miami playing. And so you sort of forget Notre Dame beside the idea of if Ohio State has to get in, they still have to jump over some teams to get there, one of those teams being Notre Dame.
But Ohio State would have something left on their plate to eat. As you said, I don't think Notre Dame has any food left to eat on their plate.
Stanford, not the same thing as potentially beating Wisconsin at the end for Ohio State, which would be an impressive victory if the Buckeyes were able to get in the Big Ten championship game. I imagine they're not thinking about that quite yet with Michigan coming up on Saturday. Just ahead of the Fighting Irish at number 7 is Georgia, and this looks just as it did a week ago. Georgia, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State going 7 through 10. Georgia as Georgia Tech, they're in the SEC championship game against the winner of the Alabama-Auburn game. All right, Kirk, you see not much change, especially right there, 7 through 10 among the teams who are still in contention to make the college football playoff.
So just to simplify what Joey was talking about, we talked about this a little bit last week when we were at the basketball game. If Ohio State, for example, goes all the way down from where they are at 9 to try to get into the top 4 with just 2 weeks left, what Ohio State basically has to hope happens is Alabama wins out. If Alabama wins out, you know, you look at the teams ahead of them, Georgia and Auburn are then out of the mix. Now you kind of talk about Ohio State trying to beat Wisconsin. That would put Wisconsin out of the mix. Then, as Booger talked about, you wonder if the committee would look at Ohio State and say, hey, they have Stanford. They don't play a championship game. Would that be enough to move Ohio State past Notre Dame? Then it comes down to the debate, the loser of the ACC championship, and if Ohio State were to win out, a Big Ten champion. Kind of ironic, fellas. Last year, Ohio State fans were saying, Big Ten championship doesn't matter. This year, they're going to be saying, hey, wait a second. Big Ten championship should matter over the loser of the ACC championship game. It's funny how, depending on the year, what you might argue. But that would be that scenario if it were to play out.
Yeah, hey, let's be honest. It depends on what you want to happen,
exactly.
What you might argue, right?
Kirk, our good buddy Snoop on the way, and we're having that very argument of the Big Ten championship being valued that much more. But if you're Ohio State, not just Alabama, you want Miami to win out. You want Oklahoma to win out. What you want, if you're an Ohio State fan, is you want to create a pool of 2 lost teams. And you want that pool to include a team like Georgia. You want that pool to be USC. You want that pool to be Clemson. You do not want to have the argument against a 1-loss team. And so if Miami wins out, they send a feed, all of a sudden it bumps Clemson down. If Miami loses, though, it is going to be a tough argument for a 1-loss Miami if you're Ohio State saying, hey, we deserve to get above that team. And so that's where it'd have trouble jumping Oklahoma because they lost to Oklahoma. So there's 3 teams that Ohio State, as they're trying to beat Wisconsin, as they're trying to beat Michigan, they better keep their eyes on the other undefeated teams and hope they win out.
Right, which is why I threw out the Alabama scenario, because if Auburn beats Alabama in the Iron Bowl and Auburn goes on to win the SEC, Auburn is in. Miami or Clemson, that winner's going to be in. You have Oklahoma. If Ohio State can win the Big Ten, now you have Wisconsin sitting there at 12-1. You're going to have Alabama sitting there at 11-1, and then you'll have Clemson there. To me, Wisconsin would be out, and now you're choosing between Alabama and another team with 1 loss. That's how I think Alabama, even if they lose this weekend, they will be set up in a pretty good scenario. I know nobody wants to hear it, but I think they will be set up pretty good.
Are you saying with Clemson losing or winning? Because if Clemson loses, then even with the 2 losses, and one being to a Syracuse team, when you say Kelly Bryant got hurt, Clemson would still be sitting there with an argument because of their resume.
I understand that.
Is better than Alabama's resume with 1 loss.
And also don't discount a Miami resume in that situation.
Correct.
Miami has the #1 strength of record in the country right now while they're undefeated. If they were to lose a close game to Clemson, they certainly would have to be considered as well. Let's get right to the top here and look at the teams 1 through 6 and see how similar it looks to a week ago. At #1 is Alabama, the Crimson Tide, with the huge game against Auburn on the Plains. College game day will be there on Saturday. Just behind Alabama at #2. This time, it is Miami. Miami, despite getting a scare from Virginia for a while, moves ahead of Clemson by a spot. At #3, just behind the Hurricanes. Clemson slips 1 now with the single loss to Syracuse. So maybe the committee, and we'll talk to Kirby Hocutt in a bit, has reevaluated. They've been getting criticized for giving Clemson a pass. For the loss to a Syracuse team that is going to finish with a losing record. And the 4th team, I assume, is going to be the Sooners. And it is. Oklahoma holds on to that #4 spot. But now the 2 undefeateds are on top, or 2 of the 3 undefeateds at 1 through 4. At #5 on Wisconsin. After taking care of business against Michigan this past weekend, and Auburn is at #6, but the Tigers spot with 2 losses. They're in tremendous position, have a shot at #1. They've already beaten Georgia when they were #1, can do it again to Alabama. Then they would get another game against Georgia. So among 2 lost teams, nobody could be in a better position than Auburn sits right now, Herbie.